The moment someone realizes they can no longer get the same emotional access to you, something in their perception quietly changes. Because it's not your absence that shakes them. It's the fact that you are still there, but no longer in the same way. Have you ever noticed that the second you stop over-explaining, over-giving, or over-chasing, the dynamic shifts? It's almost like the relationship starts reacting to a version of you that is no longer negotiable. And if you've ever experienced that strange silence where someone who used to be emotionally available suddenly starts adjusting their behavior around you, then you already know this is not random. Something deeper is happening underneath the surface of connection. What a man thinks when he sees that your dignity is stronger than your love for him is not something soft, beautiful, or comforting. It is something that hits deeply inside his ego. In that exact moment, he does not only feel that he is losing your affection, but he also feels that his position in your emotional world is collapsing. It is not just about love leaving the space. It is about control, access, and assumption breaking at the same time. And this shift is not gentle for him. It is disruptive because he starts realizing that the emotional space he once relied on is no longer responding in the same way anymore. This video is not created to comfort you or to make you feel superior. It is here to show you something very specific and psychological. It explains what happens inside a man's mind when he understands that he can no longer reach you in the same emotional way, no matter what he does. This is not about drama or emotional storytelling. It is about internal mechanisms that switch quietly but powerfully. When that shift happens, nothing feels normal for either person anymore, because the old emotional pattern that both of you were used to no longer exists in the same form. Inside this process, there are 6 clear mental steps that unfold in his mind. These steps are not always visible on the outside, but internally they are very active. It starts with confusion, then slowly moves into discomfort, resistance, internal questioning, emotional repositioning, and finally a new psychological structure. Each stage changes how he perceives you and how he behaves around you. And the most important part is that this is not triggered by distance alone, but by your internal shift in self-respect and dignity that changes the emotional rules without words. If someone leaves before understanding the full process, they miss the most important part of the transformation, because the final stage is where the emotional reversal becomes permanent. It is the point where the woman either returns to old patterns of overgiving or steps into a stable version of herself that cannot be easily shaken again. This is why this is not ordinary relationship content. It is about understanding emotional structure at a deeper level, especially when love and self-respect begin to conflict inside the same situation. Carl Jung explained that no one truly meets another person without also facing parts of their own inner shadow. This is exactly what happens in these moments of emotional shift. When your dignity becomes stronger than your attachment, it forces the other person to face discomfort within themselves. It is no longer just about how they see you, but also about how they see themselves in relation to you. And that reflection is not always easy for them to accept, because it removes emotional comfort and replaces it with awareness they were avoiding before. If you feel this is connecting with your experience in some way, the purpose is not to push you emotionally, but to make you observe your own patterns more clearly. Because understanding this is not about reacting, it is about awareness. And awareness changes how you respond internally, even before anything changes externally. When people hear this at the right time, it does not just shift emotions temporarily, it changes how they interpret relationships entirely and how they define their own emotional boundaries moving forward. Step 1 begins at the moment he realizes that you are no longer emotionally negotiable. This is very important to understand because most people assume realization happens when someone leaves physically. But in reality, realization begins when emotional access changes. When he notices that he can no longer move you internally the way he used to, something shifts inside him. It is not about arguments or statements. It is about the absence of your old emotional response that he was used to receiving without effort. A very common situation can be seen in real-life examples where a woman does not create drama, does not beg, and does not chase. From outside, she may even look calm and composed, but internally, something has already changed. She stops over-explaining, stops adjusting herself too much, and stops tolerating things that quietly disturb her. This does not happen as an emotional reaction, but as an internal correction. And this correction slowly changes the emotional structure of the relationship without loud confrontation. At first, she may not even realize how much she has changed internally. She simply stops betraying herself in small ways. She no longer forces herself to accept things that feel uncomfortable. She no longer tries to maintain peace at the cost of her own emotional stability. And this shift, although quiet, creates a major difference in how she shows up in the relationship. Because now her presence is no longer based on adjustment, but on alignment with herself. From his perspective, this creates confusion. He does not immediately label it as loss or separation. Instead, he feels a strange emotional distance that he cannot fully explain. Her reactions are no longer predictable in the same way. Her emotional availability feels different, and even her silence carries a different weight. This is the first psychological disruption, because what was once automatic and comfortable is no longer guaranteed. At this stage, he is not yet afraid. He is simply unsettled. He starts observing more carefully, trying to understand what changed, not out of emotional concern, but out of internal need to reposition himself. Because when someone who is emotionally flexible stops being that way, it creates uncertainty. And uncertainty forces the mind to become alert, even if there is no direct conflict or separation. This is where the internal shadow response begins to activate. He does not think in clear sentences like, "I am losing her." Instead, the feeling is more subtle. It is a sense that something familiar is no longer functioning the same way. The emotional role he was used to is no longer stable. And that shift is more impactful than physical distance because it affects identity inside the relationship itself. Even if he outwardly maintains calm or distance, this fear does not come out in clear words. It shows itself as ambiguity, lukewarm messages, strong gestures followed by long silences. He tests whether you are still there, but no longer from the same place. And when he notices that you no longer react as before, that you do not chase, that you do not complain, the unease increases because now he can no longer regulate himself through your emotional response. Jung would describe this as a collision with the true self without masks. And not everyone can endure this inner gaze. Here, many women misunderstand the moment, confusing intensity with progress, believing that on and off closeness is a sign of awakened love. It is not always that. Sometimes it is only a system trying to regain control. Your role is not to decode it, but to stay with yourself. When you do not move out of fear, when you do not feel the silence, he is left facing something unfamiliar, his own emptiness. And this meeting can either transform him or push him away. What matters is this. Hear it calmly. Your dignity does not speed up processes. It exposes them. When he comes from presence, you feel it. When he comes from fear, you feel that too. The difference is stability. Love born from fear requires constant proof. Love born from respect seeks consistency. And by not leaving your center, you become the natural filter that separates the two without saying a word. At this point, the dynamic has already started to shift.
Earlier, you were the one measuring time, words, and gestures.
Now it is him. He watches whether you are still available, whether something softens, whether you start adjusting again. And when you don't, an uncomfortable but revealing feeling arises. He no longer has you secured, not because you are leaving, but because you are no longer dependent. This emotional independence strongly reorganizes his sense of value. Jung claimed that real desire appears when the other cannot be possessed, only encountered. Your dignity removes you from the position of emotional object and brings you back into the position of subject, and that changes the way you are seen. You are no longer the one who is always there. You are the one who chooses to be there. This difference seems small, but it completely changes the experience of bonding. This is also a sensitive stage for you, because when he shows fear or confusion, it can activate your old role of soothing, explaining, holding.
This is where it is decided whether your dignity is identity or strategy.
If you restore the old pattern, the system returns to familiarity. If you hold your ground, something new forms, not from coldness, but from inner alignment. And this alignment starts requiring a clearer position from him. Some men rise here, becoming more present and more emotionally responsible. Others withdraw, not because you did something wrong, but because the level has changed and dignity does not lower itself. You do not push, you do not threaten, you simply do not reduce yourself. And this reshapes the bond without confrontation, because real respect is not forced, it is embodied. And when it is embodied, it cannot be ignored. I want you to notice something important. When he changes, it is not because you convinced him. It is because your integrity confronted him with himself. And when he does not change, it is not failure, it is information. Your dignity saves you years of confusion. It shows you who can meet you at your level and who only loved you when you made yourself smaller. This clarity hurts at first, but frees you later. Now we enter the point of no return. When he understands he cannot go back to the version of you that bent, an inner decision appears. Not always conscious, but decisive. And depending on how you hold yourself here, this moment can either transform him deeply or close the ending with a clarity that was not possible before. Step 4. The moment he understands there is no return, the version of you who waited, adapted, and gave in to keep the bond is no longer coming back. And this certainty does not come through conversation. It comes through an irreversible inner knowing. He can no longer trigger the same reaction from you. He can no longer rely on your emotional availability. Something has closed, not from resentment, but from alignment.
And when that happens, his mind stops testing and starts deciding from a deeper place.
A quiet grief appears. He does not mourn your physical absence. He mourns the loss of a dynamic that gave him comfort without effort. And that hurts more than it seems. Because facing a woman who no longer shrinks forces him to see his own limits. Jung called this the death of a projection. You are no longer holding his emptiness. And when projection falls, only two paths remain: to grow or to withdraw emotionally. If he stays, something changes in how he sees you, not from comfort, but from respect. He starts regulating himself, taking responsibility, measuring what he gives, not out of fear of losing you, but because he understands he cannot access you the same way as before. Your dignity raised the standard without asking, and this changes the bond. You are no longer refuge. You are encounter. And not everyone knows how to love from that place. If he leaves, the ending is also different. There is no drama, no endless cycle. There is a clear inner boundary. You do not chase explanations. You do not try to convince. And that leaves a mark, because even if he leaves, He carries a reference that cannot be erased. The woman who did not abandon her axis for love. That image returns later when other dynamics fail. This is where doubt usually appears. Was I too firm? But you were coherent. And coherence is never excess. Love that survives only when you shrink is not love. It is dependence. Your dignity did not destroy anything valuable. It only revealed what could not hold at your level. And even though letting go hurts, something inside you begins to relax. No more constant tension. No more silent self-betrayal. Jung would say, this is where individuation begins. You no longer define yourself by being chosen. You define yourself by choosing yourself. In conclusion, the real message of everything you have heard is not about controlling anyone's thoughts or predicting their reactions. It is about understanding yourself more clearly in relationships and learning to stay connected to your own values, boundaries, and emotional stability. When you begin to respect yourself more deeply, your choices naturally become calmer and more intentional. You stop reacting out of fear or confusion, and you start responding from clarity. This shift does not come from changing others, but from changing your relationship with yourself. Some connections will grow when both people meet each other with maturity and respect. Others may fade when that balance is not shared. Both outcomes bring understanding, not loss, because every experience becomes a reflection of what you are ready to accept and what you are no longer willing to repeat. The most important realization is simple. When you remain honest with yourself, you don't lose love. You gain direction. And from that place, your future relationships naturally become healthier, more stable, and more aligned with who you truly are becoming.